You know what? I might as well start doing introductions because our guest speaker today is Antonia. Um, she, I first met Antonia where she probably had one of the coolest job titles I've ever heard. I think, oh, and I've just gone blank. I mean, her current job title is pretty darn cool, being a professor of participatory storytelling and public policy at Teesside, and is a globally well-known expert on digital storytelling. So Antonia's got an educational background in modern and contemporary history, and started on focusing on social history, but then, and this is me summarizing a very extensive biography, is then got involved in sort of cultural studies first in Europe, but then started to get involved in experimenting in the digital storytelling methodology in formal and non-formal education and how to apply that as a tool for social engagement. And then since 2008 has had a variety of international research projects and collaborative partnerships, travels all over the world helping develop tools and methods to foster innovation in education, and is now interested in the role of storytelling and memory in today's digital world, and wants to trial ways of using digital storytelling as a methodology for interdisciplinary research. And I know the thing that I'm particularly excited about is understanding the insights from Antonia's world that we can start to apply within the NHS and within influencing some of the discussions about NHS policy. That's my personal excitement. But Antonia said she's very keen for today to be interactive and participatory. So do put stuff in the chat. We'll pick it up as we go along. There will be some time for questions afterwards. But without further ado, Antonia, the floor's yours.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm very happy to see new and old friends as well in the room. So thank you for joining the conversation. So as we said, Bryn, I'd like to give an overview of what I mean by digital storytelling and then share a few experiences, but mainly to reflect as a collective on the applicability of this model within the sector you're working in. So, and as I love gentle disruptions, I think you feel free to disrupt gently whatever I'm saying, whenever I'm talking about anything. If there is anything that is unclear, please jump in the conversation. If you write in the chat, probably I'm not able to read it while I'm sharing, but Bryn, of course, will read and interrupt and pop in additional comments. So thank you for the introduction, Bryn. I like to say, and while I'm starting to share the slides, I like to say that I'm not an academic because I wanted to be an academic, but I am an academic by chance, in a sense that I've been driven by passion mainly, and I always loved learning from people. So my background in history and computer science brought me first to work in the heritage sector to facilitate conversations around the public value of history and how we relate with the place in which we live through the memories of the people who are living in that place, and re-exploring traditional ways of sharing that knowledge. And then I was very lucky while I was working in a large consortium of cultural institutions in Italy, back in Italy, to be invited to a digital storytelling training when we were setting up the first European network around digital storytelling. And with a dear friend of mine, Federica Pesce, who is still working in Rome, and she set up a fantastic cooperative of women working around storytelling and community engagement projects around social justice. We organized this training with Joe Lambert, who is the initiator of the whole movement around digital storytelling. So I want to start with my experience of that, and then all the reflections that I tried to develop with the people I work with over the years. And of course, I need to mention that then my transition to academia was prompted by the opportunity to come to the UK exactly 10 years ago in a week. So next week will be 10 years for me in the UK. And I had the joy to move to Loughborough University, where they were starting a large initiative around digital storytelling. And they were looking for someone with a PhD and knowledge of this approach. And then I said, okay, let me try, even if I was very happy where I was working, because I was really curious to see how this approach could be applied as a research tool within academia. And then over the years, I've been exploring the different aspects of storytelling, and I've been fascinated by one hidden aspect of the digital storytelling process that is, in my opinion, the pillar of this process, that is the listening aspect of it. Because very often when we engage participants, we expect them to engage with us, but sometimes it's not possible for various reasons. And therefore, I've been trying to understand the value of the lack of engagement or of a silent engagement. And these are all the aspects I'm going to explore with you today, with a particular focus on the co-production of knowledge. So how do we shape a better future for everyone, considering the knowledge each of us can bring into the conversation? As Bryn said, I then, after 9 very happy years at Loughborough and the Storytelling Academy, I moved in February to Teesside University in the Northeast. And I'm very happy about this new adventure, in particular because we are setting up a new research institute that is around collective place leadership. And my role within this research institute is to shape with the people, for the people, a new strand of research around future and imaginative imaginative and innovative futures. So how can we use engagement approaches to shape a better future through, in my opinion, story listening? So we've got an hour, probably slightly less. And what I want to focus on is the participatory element of storytelling, but starting from this strong structure of the story-centered digital storytelling model that I guess some of you may know. And I will present some creative disruptions we've been able to co-create with project partners, community members, and colleagues across different disciplines. And also thinking about the role of storytelling, thinking about your work, thinking about the role of storytelling to inform practice and policy. So how can this process or different techniques that this process can facilitate and support implement and inform those help inform those changes. So something that I was obsessed with while developing my own practice within digital storytelling was what makes storytelling, applied storytelling, participatory storytelling different from other qualitative research methods. There is something to reflect on when we talk about digital storytelling. Is the digital aspect the key focus? Is that so important, or is more the applied, the co-designed, the participatory element that is the real driver? And then thinking about, again, the impact on policy, thinking about co-creation. I know we got friends who are expert in co-design in the room. I saw Cara earlier. So when co-creation happens is quite key. So very often, especially in academia, we use this buzzword of co-creation and participation as a sort of add-on that sometimes we use more for dissemination, sometimes evaluation, but not really to understand the key challenges, the key research questions. So if co-creation is anticipated, what are the implications and the challenges at the institutional level? And then thinking about co-creation, exclusion, and inclusion, and working with marginalized voices and communities. I'm just back, not just, it's still very vivid in my memory, but I recently visited New Zealand and Australia. And in New Zealand, I've been working with a group of physiotherapists and clinicians who are using storytelling techniques, and this is why they wanted my involvement, to find out why the Maori community, and this could be broadened up to other indigenous communities, are not really using the service for chronic pain. So it seems quite a distant subject to talk about for them. And so we are trying to understand why there is a barrier for that particular community, and using storytelling techniques and traditional story sharing techniques to better understand those barriers and inform, on the other side, the health system, the change in practices within the health system to better understand why they don't address that issue of chronic pain, and they are affected in quite a high proportion in that community. Anyway, another question to consider when applying this practice within different contexts is the feasibility of it. So as I said, I started my journey a long time ago with Joe Lambert, and I'm going to say a few more words about his approach. But the challenge of applying that original model into research or other institutional levels is really there, because it's quite time consuming and it requires not just time commitment, but also other types of resources. And again, is that a barrier to engagement? So that has been my sort of question. Is time a barrier to engagement when thinking about digital storytelling? So here, this is an infographic that was created by a colleague of mine when we were, and this is from the old project I was mentioning, and I like to keep it alive, because we were trying to simplify the 7 stages of 7-step process, but still keeping there the key elements of the workshop model developed by Joe Lambert and his group in the late 90s. Something I like to really stress is the ethos of this practice. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Theater of the Oppressed from Brazil, and Boal's experience. I always see a sort of connections between the digital storytelling ethos and that type of performative practice. I know that Helen and Bryn, they will give you these slides. I would strongly recommend to watch the video. I put this link here in this slide. I don't think we want to spend now 7 minutes to listen to this video, but once you have time, and if you have a chance to do that later or whenever you have time, trying to listen to this video carefully. It's a sort of historical recount of how the Story Center became what it is now, and they are leading in the development of digital storytelling as a workshop-based practice, and they are globally well known. And I think the attention that we should put is again on the initial social justice strong ethos and the pillars they've been building over time around that. And in particular, there are very successful projects around one of them being Silent Voices, which gives a sort of deep insight into the approach of using digital storytelling. So as I said, I'm going just to do this very briefly because I guess many of you know this approach. But when we start, and I love to start always the digital storytelling process with the first step, that is the story circle, is a key aspect. And I still remember when I moved to Loughborough, the first thing I did, I interviewed Steve Bellis. If you want to take a note of this name, is a fantastic colleague and is the person that actually taught me the principles of digital storytelling and how to make it really effective. And in particular, challenging the notion of the facilitation process, which is another question to reflect on. What is the role of the facilitator? So the facilitation process, going through these 5 steps, and as I said, we start with a story circle where we contextualize. We tend to focus on a particular subject, a particular key question we all have in common, and we ask participants to share that first-person narrative, so their unique story, their unique perspective in a narrative form. I think something that is essential of this aspect, again, going back to the storytelling, story listening loop, is the role of the other participants, the silent participants. I've got many examples I could share with you of people who had they didn't feel that was the right place for them yet to share their narrative because it was a difficult story to share. They were silent during the story cycle, and we gave them the opportunity to be silent, but they were so proactive in supporting the others in shaping their narrative. So what I'm saying, in a story cycle, you would expect each participant to share, let's say in 10 minutes, their story verbally, but the facilitator is the one in power, and this can be problematic. So over the years, I've been trying to apply different techniques of collective facilitation to really enable that listening loop and to keep the attention of all the participants, even the ones who couldn't or didn't want to share their first person narrative at that stage, to really have a role and build that kind of trust, mutual trust within the group. So that's my first gentle disruption of the model. Story circle, I felt very uncomfortable with the power dynamics, even if the facilitator is the most gentle person in certain environments, especially going back to the example I was giving about the workshop with the Maori community. I was an outsider for my language, my culture, my lack of understanding of the power dynamics in the room. And therefore, as I did in other contexts, I asked each participant to act in the three key roles of the facilitation process, and therefore sharing that responsibility of facilitating and supporting the other listeners in asking questions and providing feedback. And I think that was quite a successful change, small change in the traditional conventional story center model. Conventionally, after the story cycle, we would move into a script writing phase. Whilst the story cycle is very social, so it's based on exchange, the writing stage can be quite isolating. It is good in terms of self-reflection. It is good in terms of optimizing the time, because we could actually ask our participants to do that task in their own time. But in certain circumstances, it's not accessible. Not anyone can write easily or want to write and transform what they shared verbally into a short script of 200, 250 words. So another addition and little disruption I did for this stage was to implement something that I call collaborative storyboarding. And it's something that then has been adapted as a short activity that can be easily extracted and applied as a one-off activity for a very short workshop. What is nice of this, and I'm happy to share templates with you that have been successful over the years. And this is a change that was prompted by participants within multicultural context, for example. So where people were, like me, using English as a second language or third language or fourth language, they felt that they were not able to fully represent in text the feelings and the depth of the story that were able to represent and share verbally in the story circle. So the use of storyboards with the visuals and little lines to write down notes, and the dialogue that happens in the collaborative exercise, it enables this storytelling, listening loop to really create a powerful dynamic within the group, and makes everyone really capable of recognizing that the story they are sharing is for someone to be listened to. So an element that is essential in the storytelling process, and it is very hard for non-professional storyteller to focus on, is the audience. Who is my story for? Why am I telling this story? What do I want these people to feel and think about what I'm saying? What is the reaction that I'm trying to explore with them, in them? So this collaborative storyboarding technique, when done on a very personal subject, can really unpack and unlock all the complexity of interpretation and the delivery of a difficult message. So the usual model would then go into the creative space, transforming that narrative into a voiceover first through a recording of the script, that in this case could be also improvising and recording straight from the storyboard, and then going into the video making, into the editing phase. And something I really like, very often we can, again, optimize the time and ask participants to do this in their own time, share with them tutorials, how to make those videos and then provide one-to-one support or follow-on support, or again, make them work in pairs or in small groups. Something that is important to focus on is the power of the visuals to express something that we can't reveal in words, and how the visuals can complement the hidden, something that we can't really frame in other ways. So I think that technical aspect is very delicate because it's not just about the making, but it's about the understanding of the complexity of the balance of different languages coming together. So the verbal language, the written language, and the visual language, silence, sound, and everything we can use in a multimedia output. And then the sharing phase, which I think is still one of the most important steps. And again, we need to be selective sometimes when we organize workshops, when we can do some of them and partially online, partially in person. But the sharing is very, and again, the co-design, that we'll talk later about how co-design is important to decide as a group what type of sharing we want to do. Is the screening of all those stories, is it just for the people who are part of the workshop? Is it for people, the general public? Is it for policymakers to make them understand the issues we've been exploring together? And I think that talking about how this sharing is happening at the very early stage is very important because it could shape even how the narratives are created. So I still remember very strongly once I had a person who made a story about their parents, and then I said, "Are you inviting your parents to the screening?" And then she said, "No." So it's like, the implication of the story on the people who are involved in the story and the kind of audiences we want to open these stories for. So anyway, this was an overview on the conventional model, little changes that can make those conventional steps a little bit more versatile and also make those steps individually independent if we don't have the, let's say, the generosity of time on our side of having 3 or 5 days to work with people. So as I'm sure you are aware, the model from the US was very successfully exported in Europe. I just wanted to put this link for you because of the sector you are all linked to, or the majority of you are linked to. And I'm sure you have plenty of opportunities to go and explore patient voices and the type of work they've been doing. I would say that Patient Voices and the fantastic work that Pip Hardy and Tony Sumner are doing, and this is one of their most successful books, is very much driven by the conventional model that Joe Lambert developed. So they tend to reapply that model as it is. And the majority of the work I've been doing is actually to explore the challenge of the replicability of that model and how to make it more fluid and accessible and inclusive through some adaptations and new hybrid forms that I think we should consider. And I think they were successful in many of the projects. And of course, measuring success is another challenge that we can discuss anyway. Is it success for the project? Is it success for the people? Is it success for the facilitators, or for the funders? So again, it's another complex aspect to consider when working with a practice like this, considering all the ethical implications of applying this practice when working with vulnerable people, for example. But anyway, the majority of my work has been really around challenging the conventional model, not because I don't like it. I love it, but I think that to make it even more successful, we really need to understand the adaptability of that model, considering also different social and cultural contexts. And for example, back to the example, as I'm using this, has been a very important experience for me in terms of learning on the practice as well. The project in New Zealand, for example, we had in the room while I was running the story circle, we divided the circle in an inner circle and a wider circle because we had each patient who came to the project, they came with a carer, a person that was supporting them. And then the inner circle became the intimate one, and the outer circle became the one of the people who were mainly listening and not interacting too much. And in the outer circle, we had also two Maori artists. And they embrace the spirit of the story listening I was describing earlier in the most beautiful way, because they've been painting and drawing using, the traditional ways of interpreting certain elements of those narratives. And in the end, they produce for each story a drawing. And then at the end, in the screening, there was the exhibition of those artifacts and also the screening of the story. And each storyteller was then given the drawing as a sort of recognition of the, again, expansion of what interpreting a narrative or listening to a story, a personal story, can mean, linked to particular traditions. And again, this is the role of active listening, and the deep connections that that aspect can prompt. So I'm going to share now two examples. I'm very proud of these two examples. They were made by two data science students, and the brief they had was to think about how to embed data into their narratives. So they did some research about topics of their interest, and they were given 3-4 options of themes they could explore. They are both around mental health, and they are both linked to their own personal experiences. And they were an opportunity for them who were used to work with coding and other type of, AI, the quantitative methods and everything, to make them think about how to make data accessible, impactful, and using a combination of data, not data-driven storytelling, but data-informed first-person narratives to generate a higher level of audience engagement and potentially prompt a reaction that could be increased awareness or an action. So I'm going to share these two stories, and then I will stop sharing for a little while, and then we can have a short conversation on these two stories and everything I've been saying so far, and then I will dive deeper on other issues around co-design and storytelling. Let me increase the volume.
I like playing guitar. It feels good. It helps me cope with my mental health. It's not the only way I cope. I also speak with family and friends, and I also go out in nature. I live alone, so sometimes lots of thoughts overwhelm me, and I become depressed. I've learned to cope, though, by speaking up and seeking help. But it's not always been like this. When I was 14, I went to an all-boys high school in Kenya. I was bullied by older students, being woken up at 2 a.m., being beaten up. It was dark. My grades declined due to lack of sleep, and there was always this constant fear that I would fail at the end of it all. I got depressed. I wanted to transfer, but my dad didn't let me. He said it was a good school and other things. I almost lost all hope till my sisters convinced my dad to let me transfer. They opened his eyes and I finally got transferred. I became better after that. I won this battle with help. And the question remains, what about others like me with the same culture-induced stigma that prevents speaking out? Just because you're a man doesn't mean you have to be tough. We're all human. We need to speak up, to be heard, so that we get the help we deserve, the help we need.
And the second story now.
School teaches us that we can do anything if we try. Well, I wanted to be an athlete, an Olympic athlete, and so I tried at that. I trained hard, and after a few years I started winning medals, representing my club, school, county, region. I medalled at national events. I was still hungry to improve and training harder than ever. At 17, I made the top 5 athletes under the age of 20 for my event in the UK, and was being considered for European level competition. I was happy. And then I got injured. Stress fractures in my spine left me with chronic back pain, which was getting worse and worse, so I had to stop. I had to quit. I found it difficult to transition to a life outside of sport. I'd lost my sense of identity. I felt lost, empty, passionless. I felt like I'd wasted my big chance. I felt like a failure. Fast forward to now. I found a new passion. I go to music events, concerts and festivals and see artists perform amazing music. They inspire me to write my own music, like the music you're listening to right now. I think school got it backwards. It's not you can do anything if you try. It's you can try and do anything. Because I now believe that effort is success. And I'm happier now than I've ever been.
Okay, so let's just take some minutes to talk and reflect.
You know, the first reflection that sprung out for me was what a wonderful way both those stories were to make research more accessible, you know, and to sort of draw us as audience into, you know, the findings around, you know, black men's mental health or people transitioning out of sport. And I thought that's quite incredible and quite a contrast to how we typically do it in the NHS, which I don't know about the rest of the audience. It tends to be death by PowerPoint. Um, but anyway, no, opening it to the group, that was my immediate reflection was how powerful it was to draw you in and then make you pay attention to the research.
Yeah, and also shifting the dynamics, you know, is data informed, but not too heavy in terms of information as well. So something we've been working with them a lot, because you can imagine as data scientists, they came with a very structured idea of how to present data and using, you know, graphs, infographics, all those kind of things. And then we had to work on the personal part, a personal element. But also we worked a lot on what I call the waves of emotions in a narrative. So for example, the first story, when he came into the story circle, the object he brought in to start the conversation was the guitar. So the guitar as something that can generate happiness. Yeah, so is the happy space. Whereas the second one came in with a shirt. It was just admitted to Loughborough as an athlete, as a fantastic sport university. It came as an athlete first and then student. And then he discovered he couldn't be an athlete anymore. So that kind of, he had his unused Loughborough sport shirt with him as the starting point of, making understanding that his life and his identity were changing in a space that was meant to be completely different, and in an experience that was meant to be completely different. But if you think about the two stories, the power of music in the second story is so strong, because music is saving, let's say, this person and creating a new passion in his life. And therefore, it's like, is even the entry point of a narrative is a very important aspect to then develop those nuances and those emotions that we can all explore in different ways. And that, I see comments in the chat as well.
Yeah. And in the, and I totally chimed with me about, because, we work a lot in data. My career has involved a lot of data, and I've always found a stat or an infographic doesn't do what a story can do. How do you have a way of structuring and ordering the stories? Because you mentioned the waves of emotion, and both had a trajectory from sort of light, dark, light, or from sort of, light to dark, and then sort of hope again at the end. Both followed a similar, but how do you manage that? Do you have templates, or what do you do?
Yeah, sometimes we use the storyboard and templates to understand those waves and make sure that there are waves. Because very often we start with a mood and we keep that mood, and then it doesn't change, and therefore doesn't get that attention and attention at the same time. And this is very hard. So initially, I thought that this was something, and again, was back to the conventional model. As I was trained in digital storytelling, I was told that the voiceover was the key aspect to enhance those waves of emotions. Whereas I think that's very problematic because we are not actors. We are not professional actors. We are not used to shape our emotions through voice. So actually our voice sometimes can be broken by emotions. So, as we are not acting and performing when recording a voiceover, we need to find other waves and other ways of sharing those waves. And therefore, I think that what is important is the intersection of the different languages that I was referring to at the beginning, that is given by the combination of the presence and absence of the verbal language, the visual language, and the sound. If you think about the second story, something we worked on, it's a small detail, but it makes a difference in the second story. There is a moment when you think that the story ended because there is no sound, and they put text on screen, injuries hurt, and then silent. And then you would be tempted to just stop. But no, that's the new start. Yeah.
And it was very effective, because I was thinking, oh shit, oh sorry, forgive the swearing. Oh dear, I hope the story doesn't end here.
Yeah, and that was something we have developed together. So I think people work with me on the workshop-based model, of course, with all these different disruptions. They know how many times I like to do also informal screenings on the draft production of the videos, so that the feedback happens during the video making as well, really to work on these small details. Because I think what makes digital storytelling different from any other type of media is not just the first person and uniqueness of those narratives and the authenticity of it, but it's the multiplicity of languages and how those languages work together. Yeah.
Just picking up on that point about doing informal screenings, And the reason I'm asking this question, and again, I don't know whether any of the audience have had the same experience, but when you're preparing a story, or even when you're preparing a dreaded PowerPoint deck and you're trying to make it exciting, I tend to lock myself in a room, do something, then rush into the big meeting where I've got to air this story or land this PowerPoint and fly it there for the first time. I've learned from experience that is not always the best way, but I've struggled sometimes to find a better way of doing that. So could you expand on sort of that informal screening process and how you create the right environment for that?
So it's again about feedback and working. If we create that sort of feedback loop since a very early stage in the dynamics of the process. So, and this is why I was mentioning co-creation. So I think that a digital story made in a workshop that is based on co-creation as not just a single author, is made by more than one person, because that listening loop is sort of co-authorship, because it's based on constant feedback and advice on certain elements. So as I said, if we implement collaborative storyboarding techniques, for example, where we've got people working in pairs, and what I would do in that stage that would somehow replace and complement the script writing, I would have two people, one being the storyteller, one being the story listener. And the storyboard would be made by the story listener, so that the storyteller is just thinking about how to shape the narrative and make that narrative work within a template with a certain number of boxes, a certain requirements which we can set. So in some storyboarding templates, I also put emotions. So for each scene, you think about the emotion you want to deliver, you want to prompt. And therefore, you need to identify how you do that effectively. For example, the first story, something that I think it worked very well, is when the guy was telling about his dad telling certain things, but he couldn't even say what he was saying and just wrote them on the screen. And he said, and other things like that. It's like, I don't even pay attention to those terrible things he was saying about me, being a man, being, all this kind. So again, and those elements, they emerge in the collaborative process, because let's say the listener who is making the storyboard would ask, and how do you do this? How do you express that? How do you make it obvious? Yeah. So, and this happens at a very early stage. Then when you go into the making of the editing of the film, then you will have a wider group, or the person you work with, whatever is more appropriate, depending on the nature of the narrative, that would keep providing feedback and say, oh, yes, that's how you did it. Or I don't think it works. I think this silence is too long. Or this is too fast pacing, doesn't deliver that type of emotion. So it's about connecting all those. They are little tweaks, but they make a huge difference. And this is why I think that I strongly believe in the value of first-person narratives and personal storytelling, but I also believe in the power of each individual feeling that there is another person there to listen and to help in the meaning-making process. So self-reflection, collective reflection, to extract meanings from what we have in our inner environment, inner world. There is a question about how did you pair up the attendees?
Yes, so Stephanie asked the question, how did you pair up attendees in your past workshops? I guess it will affect the outcome. For example, pair up a man and a woman to discuss gender equality could be different with pairing up the same gender.
Of course, it depends on the expected, let's say, if it is research, it depends on the research question. So I see there is Ananya in the room. She's doing brilliant research on gender equality within a specific sector, IT sector. Of course, if you are exploring certain dynamics around gender, then probably that would be interesting to explore. back to the example, it depends on the sensitivity of the subject and the confidence that people may have. The first time I did it in response to a challenge that was mutual understanding in a multicultural environment. And therefore, I tried to pair up people with a better knowledge of English with people with a weaker knowledge of English to really make sure, because this is another issue when we work within a multicultural context, that for me, English is the language of, is a professional language, right? But if I have to express my emotions, it's very hard for me not to use my first language. So I would need support to really understand that that shade of emotion I want to express is really what's coming out on the other side in a different language. And that could be another way of pairing. In the project in New Zealand, we were working with patients and the carer together, and they were shaping the narrative together because there was an important factor of trust, both culturally and I would not have paired them with a clinician or a person from a professional medical professional environment. In another workshop I did in Kenya, it was around informing policy making. My initial naive idea was to pair a community member with a policymaker. But then when in the room, I realized that power dynamics were so, how can I say, would have been a barrier. So people would have felt intimidated by that combination. So again, it's about understanding cultural dynamics and other types of emotional links or disconnection, and making sure that this combination of people working together, they are really working for the same objective. That is prioritizing the effective representation and interpretation of the first person narrative.
There's a lot in there to unpack, but do you find as a facilitator, because thinking out loud, I think often in healthcare we do work in an environment that has lots of embedded power relationships made quite subtle. So for example, the relationship between a doctor and a patient. Typically the doctor is the expert. They tell the patient what they need to get well. And we know that often creates a lot of actual discontent because the doctor is treating the symptom and the patient wants the doctor to pay attention to their story. As a facilitator, how do you manage that sort of dynamic, or how have you managed a similar dynamic?
I mean, that's an obvious dynamic that we should prepare for in advance when setting up questions, for example, and prompts. So something we could do is to ask the participants to come with something already prepared that they could share. So again, and this comes from the original model, very often we send preparation notes in advance, and participants could even write a draft script of their story, and therefore use that draft script as a starting point for that type of co-creation or communication. The other aspect that I would consider is also to somehow disrupt that but that dynamics that happens in pairs, but expand into a wider group. Because if we had, for example, 2 doctors and 2 patients would be different compared to a one-to-one conversation. Because the 2 doctors, they would probably feel that there is a different type of response and understanding from the other one, and therefore they might try to emphasize certain aspects that they would not do just in a one-to-one relationship. And so this is back to the group dynamics and what I was saying earlier about the collective facilitation. So when I do collective facilitation of a story circle, what I would do if we were just turning around the circle, I would say, okay, if I'm the storyteller, the one sitting on the right would be the facilitator, the one sitting on the left would be the timekeeper. So the facilitator role is to ask questions, support the storyteller in shaping the narrative, and engage the other participants into this feedback loop. The timekeeper would just keep us within the time frame we are expecting to complete our activity within that time frame. So I think expanding to group dynamics would somehow disrupt those one-to-one, sometimes dangerous power dynamics.
And I'm going to have one more question, then I'm going to let it to the group. How do we deal with the challenge of time? Because, for me, a lot of my storytelling practice has been done alongside my day job, sort of as an added bonus. So I've never had sort of 3 to 5 days to sit down and work through this whole model. What would you recommend for somebody in my position?
So we've been learning a lot from the pandemic days on this as well. So what I've been doing more recently, of course, I had another set of slides. I was too ambitious. I wanted to share, but they were all around co-design. And this could be something you would include in your initial phase of co-design in the workshop you are running. So you would check with your participants their availability, their time, their resources, and therefore design the sessions with them, for them, and considering your time as well. So it's very rare in research that we can do 3-5 days workshops. So the thing I tend to do is to send preparation notes in advance so that participants, they are informed. I would never miss a story circle because it's the key moment for everyone to get to know each other where possible, and therefore create those group dynamics that we were talking about earlier. But then you can very easily run a story circle with 10 people in no more than 2 hours. And then you could divide the following activities depending on what you are expecting to do. If you want to have more one-to-one support, this can happen online. If you want them to work in pairs and therefore inform each other process, they can do that online and agree that time in that time when they can do that. There are also collaborative tools for video making that you can do. You can create a video with another person on the cloud and collaborate on editing. And this means that you as a facilitator or other people working with you would support the storytelling creating that video. For example, in the project in New Zealand, we had students from the media department who were doing this co-editing work with the participants remotely because participants were very busy and so they couldn't spend too much time or come for a day in an IT room and create that film. So it's about adjusting all those things. But I would say story circle and screening are the two key collective elements and steps you should keep. The screening as well can happen online or in person. So again, in this beautiful project in New Zealand, they did a blessing of the stories as a public event, which was part of that culture. So they went into a marae, that is a community center, a sort of sacred space for them. And they've been, they were received by someone there and they did the official blessing. And then after that, they could screen the stories, talk about those stories. And then the stories will be used to inform ways in which the clinicians are working with this particular community. So they knew that their audience were the clinicians, not exactly the person who was in charge of their journey, but the ones who are training to become clinicians and junior clinicians in particular.
Wonderful. And now any questions from the group? People are clearly feeling awfully shy. Or maybe it's just hitting that stage of Thursday morning where people need caffeine. I was wondering also, what sort of action have you seen sort of as a result of some of these stories? You mentioned maybe measurement, but maybe not even as far as measuring the results. Just what action has come out?
So you know that now academia, so in the meantime, I'm checking on the comments in the chat, and people are just processing it all.
Which is wonderful. That's what we want.
And also, if there is anything I can share, yes, that was in my last slide. So I've got links here I can put. One is the university repository with everything. One is my personal, strange formatting, apologies for that. And then there is my blog where I tend to put publications, projects. The other thing is that, as you can hear, I'm very passionate about the subject. So if you've got a specific project in mind, or any question, any issue you are facing, or anything, just feel free to get in touch. I'm always happy to talk about storytelling and digital storytelling in particular, and ways of adapting it. I was saying, in terms of results, we've been doing impact case studies now as part of our research. We had strong impact evidence within non-formal education. For example, I've been working with museums, in particular the Smithsonian Institution, and family literacy programs in the US on the East Coast. And they've been changing that practice by including digital storytelling in their own programs and ways of supporting intergenerational dialogue and also literacy for newcomers. And the other evidence have been policy change, for example, in a region in Spain where for elderly education, they replaced IT education with digital storytelling. So the training that we're doing in adult education, they were no longer on IT, how to turn on a computer, but they were digital storytelling trainings. So that's just one example.
That's very cool. And I can see in the chat that's, people have obviously enjoyed, the passion you bring, and also just the wealth of resources. So I do hope people will be tapping you up, and please do share, because I know, as Helen said, we'll be sending the slides out on the community, but we'll also do social media. So please do link to blogs, links to anything you want the community to see. Please do. And then I best, with my eye on the time, hand over to Joss to do the close.
Thank you, Bryn. Firstly, just a very big thank you from me to Antonia for today's presentation. It's been very interesting and inspiring, and I'm sure everybody who has joined us today has thoroughly enjoyed it. You will find in the chat there are a couple of links that we'd like to draw your attention to. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the HPCA. It's free to do so, and you'll get a raft of benefits from doing that. And you'll also be able to see all of the free community webinars that we've got running in the upcoming weeks. One of those will be featuring on the 11th of December, and that is focused on the neuroscience for positive change. So the speaker for that, Tibi Verisay, is extremely experienced and passionate. So hopefully you'll be able to join on the day for that. And there was also a link for the for today's feedback as well in the session. So that's really valuable for us to find out what you thought, so that we can tailor, tweak, and also provide you with future sessions which are based on what you're interested in, what you would like to know more about, etc. So again, please take a look at those links. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help. And thank you again for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.